Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today's guests to discuss absolutely wonderful development of what's happening in Ukraine-Russia war. Dr. Jonathan Lockwood, welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
Yes, thank you. And Ivan Kucherenko from Kiev, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello, Sasha. Hello, Jonathan. Nice to be here with you today.
Yeah, we are all joyful for what Ukraine did in the last few days. But let's start with the movie that you prepared for us, Ivan.
Yeah, okay, let's start with it. It's really short without any English voiceover or subtitles, just for you to see how the situation is in one native region of Russia, which they consider to be untouchable, and let's see what's going on there.
Excellent.
Вот она колонна. Обратно возвращаюсь, уже огня нет, уже только дымится, но вот что осталось. Вот что осталось. Блин, пацанов, сколько пацанов, ё-моё. Вот это место, я проехал здесь. Ребята, внутри, ребята внутри.
Actually, this is you will know watch such video on television and maybe not on YouTube, because YouTube is blocking for such videos, so it's a kind of exclusive. And this video was shot 20 kilometers from the border of Russia and Ukraine, and from this video you can see that Russian troops actually did the same mistake as they did during their attack on Kiev. They moved in columns, which a large number of trucks of military troops, while Ukrainians were already holding a fire pressure on this on all of these roads, and there are rumors that this would not only one column, not only one military convoy was destroyed, so there were another. And the explanation beside it is really simple. They were hurrying, because this operation was a big surprise for everyone, despite the long waiting Ukrainian counter strike, which we discussed last year. Nobody know about this operation. Even the members of Ukrainian general staff didn't know about it. They received the orders to move to a specific position only a day before, and only then they discovered actually their goals, and not completely. So this is a really good example when a top secret preparations brought a really nice results. We already don't know anything about it. There is no information about this operation in Ukrainian media. All the information we have in media, they're from Russian sources only. In Ukrainian media is a completely silence about this operation, and this is actually remarkable.
It's excellent that they've thrown the Russians off balance. They have surprised just about everyone on both sides, and they are really it's really an excellent example of how maintaining operational secrecy and security can achieve operational and potentially strategic surprise in a war.
But a sample of Russian weakness of their own internal defense system was first exposed in 1987 by German teenager who flew his plane all the way from Germany to Moscow and landed in Red Square. And that was the most hilarious thing.
That was a breakdown. Yeah.
That time Russia was not in war with Germany, and that time Russia didn't spend billions of dollars in fortifying those borders with Ukraine. That they've said that they've spent billions of dollars to build the same fortifications they've built, they created in occupied Zaporizhia region, which Ukrainian forces were not able to breach during the last year's counter-strike. So probably the majority of those money was stolen, and we're watching how it's not confirmed that this is Ukrainian troops, that someone's troops are advancing via the Russian sovereign Russian territory. It's not occupied Ukrainian territory, it's sovereign Russian territory. And what is most remarkable, there is no nuclear apocalypse. I'm here in Kiev now. There is no nuclear strike on Kiev. There is no nuclear strike on Kharkiv, on Sumy. Russian authorities are speaking about some kind of red lines which Ukraine should not cross. Nobody should cross those red lines, and I don't know whether are these those red lines which they were talking about, or there is something else. But this is.
I think a critical Russian weakness has been uncovered, and it's interesting to see. The Ukrainians still have interestingly enough, the Ukrainians still have the option to do what we have discussed previously, a counterstrike that will seal off the Crimea from Russian control. And an operation like this may just set up the Russians for a subsequent counteroffensive against Crimea. This opens up a number of possibilities. And
John, Don, what would you think about Ukrainians getting more attacks inside Russia in two directions? One, Moscow, direct Moscow. But you can do it directly from where they are now in the Kursk region, or you can go farther east and even try to get to places like Bashkiria and Tatarstan and all that, and then go to Moscow from the east. And that I don't understand how Russia is going to deal with that.
I don't know.
Peace very quickly.
Given the situation, the Ukrainians have the initiative right now, but they have to be careful about overextending themselves, going too far into Russia, going to Moscow. You don't want to be potentially repeating the mistakes that Napoleon and Hitler made by overextending yourself deliberately through overconfidence. Right now, the Ukrainians have the Russians clearly off balance. They're clearly taking the initiative from them, and it's created a major problem for Russia internally. So now but you do have to be careful. The Ukrainians at the same time do have to be careful about unnecessarily overextending themselves and rendering themselves vulnerable to a Russian counterstrike against the forces that they have clearly now deep inside Russia.
Jonathan, I agree with you totally, but there are two things that I would like to note. Number one, it's unclear, and now more than ever, extent of ability of Russia to defend its own territory. Now it's completely in the dark. We don't understand whether to have not even huge abilities. I'm talking about any abilities at all to defend their territory, because they haven't done it since Second World War, and they were not very successful at defending their own territory until later on in the war. So right now it is very unclear, at least. The second thing is that the place where they are now, it's only 10, 20 kilometers away from Ukrainian border. So they can quite easily supply this contingent and even enlarge it. And maybe this is just to hide their true intentions to attack Crimea and take it over Crimea, because Russia is getting now overextended. They're attacking near Kharkiv. Now they have this Kursk problem, and it's a big problem. Don't try to say that there are some small contingent of Ukrainians. That small contingent of Ukrainians can crush 10,000 of Russian contingents easily.
Yeah.
So it's not small.
Well, I agree with you that this may well be a diversionary attack.
Could be.
A diversionary attack designed to draw Russian reaction, and then the Ukrainians can follow up with a counteroffensive against Crimea once the Russians have been diverted. So there are all sorts of possibilities here, all favorable to Ukraine. Yes, Ivan.
I recently read interview from Ukrainian Defense Intelligence, Kirill Budanov, chief of Ukrainian Defense Intelligence, and he said that it was just a couple of days ago before those situation started in Kursk region, and he was telling that the offensive potential of Russia is almost gone, because no one is able to continue offensive operations for more than 3 months, 2 or 3 months, and that Russia is already going to 3 months of time, starting from the start of their major offensive operation in the eastern part of Ukraine. And it's a big question whether when Russia will stop their offensive attacks and go to defense, and how Ukraine will use it. Obviously, Kirill Budanov was informed about these future operations, and I've seen the last several days by the summaries from Ukrainian general staff that really the number of Russian offensive operations is decreasing from 150 strikes per day. It's decreasing like to 100 or even 90 strikes per day. And another point which Kirill Budanov said is that Russia is facing the problems with their hiring new mercenaries to their army. They've increased the money which they're paying to the new mobilized recruits. Now they're getting more than $20,000 each of starting payment after the day after the mobilization. Actually, it's a huge money for average Russian man who earns like $100 or $300 per month. When person is earning $300 per month, $20,000 is enormous money, and even despite this, they're having problems with mobilization reserves, but they're still not ready.
Being able to live to spend it.
Yeah.
Well, supposedly family should benefit from it. So,
you think.
So if the
Uh,
soldier is being killed, so maybe family will get this money. Maybe. Why I say maybe is because even if they will get this money, there are elaborate schemes how this money will be taken away from the families. Even the FSB, they are informing local bandits that so such and such family, this is their address, they got $20,000, and you can feel free to use this money for yourself.
Feel free to use them and just share them
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah, don't
That-
forget to give us something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the Russian version of an ATM.
But you see, the problem, you're right. John. But you see, the problem is that this is not a real army. It's a bunch of mercenaries. It's a bunch of bandits, outlaws, idiots. And there's yesterday I've heard a lot of interesting discussions on Russian-speaking sources. And the main issue of what I've heard was a discussion of so-called good Russians and why Ukraine does not accept good Russians, those who are not supporting Putin. And the one reason was that there are people, like, for example, Alexander Nevzorov, who is a well-known Russian journalist for many, many, many years, but he publicly denounced Russia and Putin, and he said that he's 100% with Ukrainian people, and he was giving Ukrainian citizenship or so on. So this is one story. Now, there are a bunch of so-called good Russians who are saying that they're against this war, but they are thinking about how to build a future for Russia, a good Russia, a normal Russia, and all that stuff. And Ukrainian people are not accepting that, because whatever they're trying to do, new Russia or not so new Russia or whatever, it's still Ukrainian enemy, period. So if they are trying to find a way how to improve Ukrainian enemy, that's not good enough for Ukrainian people, accept them as being so-called good Russians or so on. So this was a discussion about that, and I totally agree with these points that people who have not denounced 100% Russia, Putin, the war against Ukraine, and confirming that they are on Ukrainian side. They are ready to go and fight with Ukrainians. That's the only thing where Russians can be accepted. Other than that, there's a collective responsibility. Remember Germany of 1945. Not all Germans were fascists, no. Only maybe 1/3 of Germans were supporting Hitler and fascism. The 2/3 were indifferent. They were saying, okay, so far so good. Now, when things were not so good, well, it's tough luck. But it took Nuremberg process. It was just the beginning. It took 20 years to really reduce the German psychology and their habits and make them a normal democratic country. It took 20 years. With Russia,
You basically had to wait for an entire generation to die out in
True.
order for that to take place.
That's true. And remember that Russia, it will take 50 years, given the size of the country. So what you have to assume, and don't even think about that card, 100% of Russians are responsible for this war. Period. I don't want to hear about good Russians and not so good Russians and maybe not bad Russians. I'm not interested to listen to that garbage. So we'll see how things are developing. So far, it's working fabulously. And when I'm talking about going all the way east to Bashkortostan, at least to Volga region, they don't have any defense there, because who would think to defend Volga regions against Japanese or maybe against Chinese or against Germans or anybody else? No. The Soviet Union and later Russia was sure, well, they have nuclear weapons. They have the second greatest army in the world. They have all this stuff. Who would think about defending some Bashkortostan? Ufa is capital of Bashkiria. Who would think defending Ufa? or Kazan, the capital of Tatarstan. And I I think that with some success, this republics, especially Tatarstan, they will join Ukrainian fighters. I'll tell you that. It's even an old funny story when during Second World War, the Germans encircled a Russian battalion, and so the Germans said in Russian language, they said in this PA system, say, "Русский, сдавайся," Russians give up. And the voice, a single voice asking, "Товарищ немец, а татары тоже?" My German comrade and Tatars also could give up. So this is that's a story. First of all, Tatars distinguish themselves from Russia. Still, they do. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised that there will be a lot of people, and not only these national republics like Bashkortostan and the Tatarstan. I think in the Volga region, there will be a lot of people who will join Ukrainian fighters. So this is one of the, Jonathan, I'll tell you, I'm not a dreamer. I'm trying to understand realities, but I'll tell you there is a great thinking that one of the parameters which are instrumental in Ukrainians' winter war is a change of regime in Moscow. And this is exactly as a chain reaction that could do a lot for changing regime.
It could very well result in a change in the Russian leadership,
Yeah.
which would greatly benefit Ukrainian objectives. And after all, the Ukrainian objective is not to conquer Russia or destroy Russia. Get them out of Ukrainian territory, allow them to be integrated into the European Union and into NATO, and thereby solidify Ukrainian independence and prosperity for the long term. And if this offensive and the operations inside Russia serve to towards that, as far as they contribute towards that end, so much the better. But they should not they should not overreach themselves, because I'll give you an example of this from the Korean War. When North Korea invaded South Korea, and they had pushed the United States to the Pusan perimeter, they were just in this little corner of South Korea trying to hold on. And then MacArthur launched the Incheon invasion, which managed to drive the North Koreans out of South Korea. And the United Nations forces were advancing into North Korea, and they had captured the Pyongyang, the capital. And MacArthur was going too far. He was advancing towards the Chinese border. That caused the Chinese to intervene. Had MacArthur not overreached, had MacArthur for example, been smart enough or restrained enough to stop at Pyongyang and the narrowest neck of North Korea, form a defensive line, leave just a tiny rump state of North Korea, and then basically solidify their defense from there, the Korean War would have been a lot shorter. But it got prolonged because MacArthur overreached. He tried to go too far. And so as good as these developments are right now for Ukraine in the short to intermediate term, they should be thinking very carefully if they are able to drive the Russians now out of the remaining provinces that they have occupied in Ukraine and get back to the pre-1991 borders, and at the same time be able to sever the control of Crimea from Russian control and reinforcement. All of this is good, and those are perfect objectives which will enable the Ukraine to conclude the war victoriously by any definition. But they should be aware of overreaching.
Especially, Jonathan, if you take Putin's answer on what conditions he would be ready to have a peace with Ukraine, he said, basically, I'm willing to have a peace, but you have to adjust to the realities on a borderline and a fighting.
Well, guess what? The Ukrainians just changed. The Ukrainians are busy changing. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
There are new realities.
There's new realities to adjust to.
Yes,
There is one possibility when Putin will be ready to stop this war. If continuing this war will cost him his power, because actually he started this war to keep his power, because the prosperous and democratic Ukraine was a great threat for Putin and for his regime to keep his power, especially after Ukraine get rid of Yanukovych, who flew to Russia. So the only one point when Putin will be ready to stop this war, if he understands that continuing this war will cost him power, not keeping this war. And this is actually what Ukraine is currently doing in the Kursk region. I've got a really cool analytics video from
Yes, please.
Dutch military expert Anders Nielsen, where it's 11 minutes long, but I really want to show it to you today, when he really analyzed the reasons and the consequences of this operation. And I completely agree with his analytics. So let's watch this video.
Excellent.
Please.
Great way to wrap up.
Mark, please launch the video.
Yeah, Mark.
Hello.
Home from vacation,
Hello.
and I was actually planning on starting out with a video about something easy, like my view on social media or something like that. But then Ukraine launched an incursion into the Kursk region of Russia, and I think for most people this was one of those what the hell kind of moments, like when Prigozhin started his march on Moscow last year. So when you watch what's going on, it's hard to make sense of things, because there's just we need more time to see how things develop before we can really get all the information. We know what they're trying to do, and we can start evaluating whether or not things are working out the way they wanted. But now we are about 2 days into this Ukrainian attack into Russian proper. And I think we're beginning to get an idea about the scale of what's going on. And we can also start making some assessments about what it is that Ukraine is trying to achieve. We still don't have the full picture, but in this video, I do want to offer a couple of suggestions about how I think about it, and how I think we can maybe try to understand what it is Ukraine is trying to do, and also the broader context about what it says about the war as a whole and the direction things are going in. So let's talk about it. I'm not going to go into all the details about troop movements, exactly where the fighting is taking place, those kinds of things. But I do think that we can by now say a bit about what it is Ukraine is trying to do by looking at the scale of what's happening. The first thing to note is that this is definitely bigger than the previous raids that we have seen that Ukraine has conducted on Ukrainian territory. So we've had these instances before where some Ukrainian forces or some of the Russian volunteer forces that are fighting for Ukraine, that they have crossed the border, they've blown up some stuff in Russia, they've taken some prisoners, they've taken a bunch of photos, and then they returned back to Ukraine. And this time it's much bigger. We can see that by the number of soldiers that Ukraine is using, but we can also see it by the types of equipment that are being destroyed in the process. So, for example, the Russians have shown that the Ukrainians brought a Buk air defense system into Russia. They have released a video about how they destroyed that Buk system. And this is a valuable system. It's a significant loss when Ukraine loses an air defense system like that. So the fact that they were willing to take that risk, it shows that this is not just a PR stunt. So what's happening here is definitely bigger than a raid. But I've also seen some people suggesting that maybe this is the beginning of a whole new big Ukrainian offensive into Russia, and Ukraine can maybe take the city of Kursk and those sorts of things. And I also don't think that's what's happening, because we have to remember that Ukraine gets most of their military equipment from the Western countries today. And many of those countries will be concerned when Ukraine does these kinds of things. They're afraid of escalation, those sorts of things. So that is going to put some limitations on the types of equipment, the quantities of equipment that Ukraine can use for this offensive. So I think scale-wise, we can say that what's happening here, it's definitely bigger than the raids we've seen before, but I also think we should not we should still understand this as a limited operation, where the Ukrainians will probably take a bit of territory, and then they will probably dig in, so it will be hard for the Russians to push them out again. At least I think that's what it looks like at this point. So why are they doing this? A few weeks ago, I made a video about what Ukraine should do if the current Russian offensive reaches the point of culmination. And I think this Ukrainian attack into Russia, it can be understood in that context. So the Ukrainians expect that the Russian summer offensive, it's coming to an end. Recently, there have been some statements that they expect the Russian progress to stop within the next 6 to 8 weeks. And as I discussed in that video, this is actually a problem for Ukraine, or it gives them a dilemma, because the current Ukrainian strategy depends on the Russians continuing to attack, because the Ukrainian idea is to cause attrition on the Russians while having the defensive advantage. So in that video, I discussed whether we were going to see the Ukrainians take some kind of offensive initiative, and this attack into the Kursk region, it can be understood in that context. It was something that the Ukrainians could do fairly easily because this area was not well defended. They were able to very quickly take some territory in Russia, and for the Russian army, it's not going to be optional if they want to take it back. So if the Ukrainians can actually dig in this area, then that might be a way to deny the Russian army the opportunity to take a break, because the Russians have to push the Ukrainians out again, and the Ukrainians will be able to continue the fight as a defensive operation with all the advantages that come with that. So in that sense, this attack into Russia does two things for Ukraine. First, it's a diversion operation, because Russia will have to divert resources away from the main effort in Donetsk to throw the Ukrainians out again from the Kursk region. And this can potentially mean that the Russian offensive in Donetsk reaches the point of culmination sooner than it otherwise would have done. And if the Russians don't divert resources from Donetsk, then Ukraine might continue and take more territory in Kursk, and they will have more time to fortify themselves. So it's a diversion operation, and at the same time, it can also ensure that the Russians will have to stay on the offensive for a longer period of time, because they won't be able to take an operational pause even after reaching the point of culmination of the summer offensive. The second thing I will say is that we need to understand this in a broader context, where the war is going to move more and more into Russia. And this is a process that's been going on for a while. When the invasion began, then everything was happening on Ukrainian territory, but now we're seeing drone attacks into Russia. We've seen raids across the border into Russia, and this is a continuation of that development. And the reason why this is happening is that Ukraine has identified these attacks into Russia as being essential for their chances of ending the war on terms that are acceptable. As I've said in other videos, the only thing that is more important for Putin than winning the war in Ukraine is to keep the power in Russia. And ultimately, this war is very much about regime security in Russia. Putin started the war because he thought it was important for the sort of long-term perspectives for regime security, and he still believes that is the case. So the only way Ukraine can make Putin stop the war is if they can turn it into a bigger regime security risk to continue the war and then to end it. So we can say that the Ukrainians have to bring the war home to the Russians, because that is how they can create domestic pressure on Putin to end the war. So no matter how things will go with this attack into the Kursk region, we need to understand that there is this development where the war is going to take more and more place on Russian territory. And that's also one of the problems, actually, with the Biden administration's approach to escalation management. There's been this idea that if we don't give Ukraine all the weapons that they ask for, then we can sort of micromanage the war and limit it to a certain level of intensity. But that's actually, what's actually happening is that the war is going to take longer, and that it's going to move more and more into Russian territory. So my personal view is that this very careful attempt at escalation management, it's actually going to lead to more escalation in the end. And by now we have brigade level warfare that is taking place in Russia's Kursk region. And in connection with the Ukrainian attempt to put domestic pressure on Putin by bringing the war home to the Russians, then it's also important to be aware of the role of conscript soldiers in the Russian army. Putin has so far been very reluctant to use conscripts in the war with Ukraine, and the reason for that is about domestic politics and the fact that it would just be extremely unpopular in Russia to send conscripts into battle, because they're not volunteers, and also because conscription is something that touches many families in Russia. There are many young men that are going through conscription right now, or that will be going through conscription in the coming years, and they have mothers and fathers and cousins and siblings. So if you start using conscripts in the war, then all these people are going to be afraid on a personal level about the safety of themselves or their loved ones. And they might start getting dissatisfied with the government that is waging this war. So for reasons of regime security, the Russian army has essentially been divided into two different kinds of armies. So there's one army that is fighting in Ukraine, and it consists of people that have more or less volunteered to be there. And then there is another army, which is the conscript army. And here the conscripts are going through the same kind of training that they've always done, and it's not being used in Ukraine. But Russia's Kursk region is not defined as part of the battle zone, and it means that it was actually protected by conscript units. So Ukraine's attack into Kursk therefore creates a dilemma for Putin, because either he will now have to accept that conscripts are being used for actual battle in the fight against the Ukrainian army, or else he will have to withdraw those conscript units from the area, and he will have to replace them with volunteer units that were supposed to be used in Ukraine. So this question of conscription and conscript soldiers is also important to keep in mind, because it means that Ukraine's incursion into the Kursk region has the potential of touching something that is very sensitive in the Russian society, and that is the safety of the young men that are going through conscription. And so it's this understanding that all Russian soldiers are not created equally. So if Ukraine kills some poor guy that is from Siberia and he joined the army to earn some money, then that's not something that's going to get people upset in the middle-class neighborhoods in Moscow and St. Petersburg. But if the conscripts start dying, then they will care, because that might hit their own family, it can hit someone they know. Okay, that was a quick take on Ukraine's attack into the Kursk region. It's still early. We don't have all the information, so do keep that in mind, that we have an incomplete picture. But I think this is definitely significant. It's much bigger than the small raids that we've seen before, and I think the purpose is to divert Russian resources away from the fighting that is taking place inside Ukraine, and also to take an initiative that will prevent the situation where the Russian offensive in the Donbass reaches the point of culmination, and then the Russians decide to take a break. And then finally, I think we need to understand this as a step in a process where the war is going to move more and more into Russian territory, because that is the trajectory that we are on. I will end it here. If you found the video helpful or informative, then please give it a like. And also remember to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon, that you will get notifications when I upload new videos. And if you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my newsletter.
Well,
Fabulous. Thank you so much.
Ivan, that was excellent.
Spot on.
Yeah.
And his points are all very well taken, and there is cause for some optimism now. That the Ukrainians have in effect seized the initiative, inflicting a significant defeat on Russian forces, and are forcing the Russians to react. And this will have repercussions, I predict, not only on the war within Ukraine, but it will have some ripple effects on the political situation in other countries, in particular in the United States.
Yes.
And what is also important, and what we forgot to discuss, that war at last came to Russia. I've got a third video for today, for the dessert in the end. Hopefully we'll have time to watch it. It's
Sure.
really funny. It's a video when Russians are asking Putin to do something, because they're not guilty. They did nothing. They've supported this special military operation. They supported this war. And they can't understand what's now is going on in Kursk region, why they have to leave their homes, why they're being bombed, why their children are afraid of big sounds and all this stuff, what Ukrainians are living on for more than 2 years. Now, at last, war came to Russia. And this is also a really great impact on this operation, But from other point of view, it shows that there is completely absence of any logic in and any understanding of consequences in the heads of Russians. They are so completely washed by Russian propaganda that they can't understand that what's now is happening in Kursk region is a direct consequence of what Putin brought to Ukraine, and that this actually is only maybe a beginning of this further going consequences. So let's just play this video when we will go to the end of our today's show, and you will really enjoy it, because I've enjoyed this video so much. It's like when Russians are crying, it's so nice to
Basically,
see
as we would say, the Russians are being given a taste of their own medicine.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's about time.
Уважаемый Владимир Владимирович, мы, жители Российской Федерации, Курской области, Суджанского района, обращаемся к вам. 6 числа на нашу землю зашли иностранные войска с натовской техникой. За несколько часов наш город был превращен в руины. Наши родные, мужья, соседи защищают Донбасс. Мы лишились земли, мы лишились домов. Мы убежали под обстрелами, бежали среди руин, многие без документов. Хотим обратиться к вам, чтобы вы... Хотим попросить помощи. Мы остались одни. Мы привыкли к обстрелам. Мы поддержали СВО. Мы помогали нашей армии с первых и продолжаем помогать с первых дней начала СВО. Кто-нибудь продолжите, пожалуйста.
Добавьте кто-нибудь.
Мы остались с детьми, без крова, без выплат, без денег. Мы уехали в чем могли. У нас дети боятся ночью спать.
Наши родные остались. Мы не можем с ними созвониться. Связи никакой нет. Пожалуйста, помогите нам вернуть наши земли. Сказать, наша администрация не работала. Давайте скажем прямо. Мы привыкли к обстрелам. Хочу сказать спасибо телеграм-каналам местным, которые предупреждали нас об обстрелах, об угрозах. Мы могли спрятаться в подвалах. И в этот раз мы знали угрозу, знали, что стянули большое вооружение натовское. Оно стоит у нас на пороге, но никто нас не предупредил. И ничего, и мы не смогли взять никаких документов, ничего. Мы уехали, родные остались там, кто в подвалах, связи нет.
Владимир Владимирович, уважаемый, Малолокня, Малолокнянский сельский совет Сужанского района, наши жители услышали в 3:30 сильные взрывы, да, и в это время полетели ракеты в нашу сторону. Все, кто смог, не понимая, что произошло, подхватили, сели на машины, некоторые уехали в трусах, в майке, некоторые в ночных рубашках, дети были закутаны в тряпку какую-то. Значит, буквально вчера, позавчера в СМИ появилась информация.
It's a little bit longer, but I think we can stop it, because it's all about the same. They are asking Putin to help them, and do you know how Putin helped them? They've offered a compensation of 10,000 rubles for those who managed that. 10,000 rubles is like $117. $117, while Putin is paying $20,000 to those who sign the contracts and go to Ukraine to kill Ukrainians and continue this war. They've offered a compensation of $100 to those Russian citizens who actually faced the consequences of this war and had to.
They're discovering that war is not as glorious and as fun as they thought it would be.
and Russia is not so great,
Right.
actually.
I'll tell you, this is another the criminal activity of Putin to pay $20,000 for people to kill their brothers and sisters, as he was saying at the beginning of the war, that Ukrainians are our brothers, and you're paying $20,000 to kill the brothers? How dare you are? What a criminal you are! And I really hope that we will see rather sooner than later something similar to Nuremberg process, and hopefully it will be held in Yalta. Remember Yalta Conference in 1945? So let's use Yalta for conference of 2024, maybe 25. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for today's program. And I'm looking forward to continue on Tuesday with even better and more significant news. In the meantime,
We have certainly reached a turning point.
absolutely, I'm very
That we can all be thankful.
yeah. Have a great weekend, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you.
Bye bye.